Sometimes the strongest man in the room is the one who never throws a punch. The Sands Casino backstage area reeked of cigarettes and cologne that October night in 1985, but Marcus Rodriguez had smelled worse in the jungles of Vietnam. At 350 pounds of solid muscle and 20 years of keeping Vegas's biggest stars safe, Tank, as everyone called him, thought he'd seen every kind of trouble a man could face. He was Frank Sinatra's personal wall of protection, the immovable force that stood between old blue eyes and anyone foolish enough to get too close. But nothing prepared him for what happened when that young Hong Kong actor wandered into the restricted area. The altercation lasted 12 seconds. Tank remembered counting because time seemed to stretch impossibly thin as Jackie Chan moved like water around his powerful strikes, redirecting 400 pounds of charging fury with movements so precise they looked choreographed. When Tank hit the concrete floor, unconscious and humiliated, Frank Sinatra was laughing, not with surprise, but with the knowing chuckle of a man who'd expected exactly what he'd just witnessed. That's when Tank realized this wasn't random. Someone had orchestrated this moment, and the question that would haunt him for the next 40 years was simple. Why did Frank want to see his best bodyguard destroyed? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The hook. The backstage fluorescent lights buzzed like angry wasps as Tank pulled himself upright, his massive frame protesting against the cold concrete. His jaw throbbed where Chan's seemingly gentle tap had somehow shut down his entire nervous system for those 12 seconds that felt like 12 minutes. Around him, the usual chaos of a Sinatra show continued. Roadies hauling equipment, backup singers touching up lipstick, the distant roar of an audience that had no idea their entertainment had just included an impossible display of martial arts mastery. But Frank's laughter still echoed in Tank's ears, drowning out everything else. "You all right there, big guy?" The voice belonged to Tommy Castellano, Sinatra's longtime manager, a thin man with nervous hands who'd been pacing the wings since soundcheck. Tommy's concern felt genuine, but his eyes kept darting toward the dressing room where Frank had disappeared immediately after the incident. Tank accepted Tommy's offered hand, though he didn't need it. Rising to his full 6'8" height, he scanned the area for Chan, but the actor had vanished as quietly as he'd appeared. The whole encounter felt like a fever dream, except for the very real ache in his ribs and the taste of blood where he'd bitten his tongue. "Where'd he go?" Tank's voice came out rougher than intended. Tommy's confusion seemed authentic. "You mean Jackie?" "Kid said he was looking for a bathroom, took a wrong turn. Lucky break Frank was here to smooth things over." Lucky break. Tank had been in the security business long enough to know when coincidences were anything but. He'd also been around Sinatra long enough to recognize the difference between Frank's public charm and his private calculations. The man who'd just watched his bodyguard get dismantled wasn't surprised. He was satisfied. "Frank wants to see you," Tommy added, nodding toward the star's dressing room. "Soon as you're ready." Tank straightened his black suit jacket, a ritual that usually restored his professional composure. Tonight, it felt like putting on a costume. For 20 years, he'd been the immovable object, the deterrent that made troublemakers reconsider their life choices. Now he was the guy who got dropped by a Hong Kong actor who probably weighed $150 soaking wet. The dressing room door was heavy oak, installed at Frank's request because he preferred the sound of real wood to the hollow knock of the casino's standard doors. Tank had stood guard outside this door in a dozen cities, had personally escorted everyone from mob bosses to movie stars through this threshold. He'd never knocked before entering because Frank liked his security to move like shadows, present but invisible. Tonight felt different. Tonight, Tank knocked. "Come in, Marcus." Frank sat in his leather chair, still in his performance tuxedo but with the bow tie loosened and the jacket draped over a nearby hanger. At 70, Sinatra maintained a precise posture of a man who'd spent decades commanding stages, but there was something else in his bearing tonight, a weight that hadn't been there during sound check. "Sit down," Frank said, gesturing to the couch across from him. "We need to talk." Tank had heard Frank use that tone maybe 3 times in 2 decades. Twice when firing people who'd betrayed his trust, Once, when explaining why they'd need to leave a Chicago venue through the service tunnel instead of the front door. It was the voice of a man who'd seen too much and decided how much truth he was willing to share. That wasn't random, Tank said, settling his bulk onto the reinforced couch. He'd learned long ago that with Sinatra, directness worked better than dancing around the obvious. Frank poured 2 glasses of Jack Daniels from the bottle he kept for post-show conversations. He handed one to Tank and kept the other, rolling the amber liquid slowly. No, it wasn't. You knew he was coming. I knew someone would come eventually. Frank sipped his whiskey, his blue eyes studying Tank with the intensity he usually reserved for difficult songs. I just didn't know it would be tonight, and I sure as hell didn't know it would be him. Tank felt a chill that had nothing to do with the casino's aggressive air conditioning. What aren't you telling me, Frank? More than you want to know, and less than you'll need to figure out. Sinatra leaned forward, his famous voice dropping to barely above a whisper. That kid, Chan, he's not just an actor. And what happened out there wasn't just a fight. Then what was it? Frank finished his whiskey in one swallow and stood, moving to the window that overlooked the glittering chaos of the Vegas Strip. A message, one I've been expecting for 40 years. Tank waited, knowing that pushing Sinatra for explanations was like trying to rush a perfect song. The man would reveal what he wanted to reveal in his own time. The question now, Frank said, his reflection ghost-like in the tinted glass, is whether you're ready to learn why someone wanted my best bodyguard to understand just how little protection I really have. Tank set his empty glass on the table between them, the crystal making a soft clink against the wood that seemed too loud in the sudden silence. Through the dressing room walls, he could hear the muffled sounds of the venue winding down, equipment cases rolling across concrete, voices calling out load-out instructions, the distant hum of slot machines that never stopped singing their electronic lullabies. Frank. Tank's voice carried 20 years of shared history, 2 decades of watching each other's backs in a business where trust was currency and betrayal was always one handshake away. I've got Maria's birthday dinner tomorrow. My daughter starts college in 3 weeks. Whatever rabbit hole you're talking about, I need to know if it's going to follow me home. Sinatra turned from the window, and for a moment, Tank saw something he'd never witnessed in the man's face before. Genuine uncertainty. Frank Sinatra had stared down mob bosses, faced hostile crowds, weathered scandals that would have destroyed lesser men. But right now, he looked like someone wrestling with a decision that had no good options. Go home, Marcus. Kiss your wife. Tell Elena I asked about her teaching job, and Monday morning, come in like nothing happened. That's not an answer. It's the only answer I can give you tonight. Frank moved to his dressing table, began removing his cufflinks with the methodical precision of a man who'd performed this ritual thousands of times. What I will tell you is this. For 20 years, you've kept me safe from everything I could see coming. Drunks, stalkers, overzealous fans, business associates with poor impulse control. You've been the wall between me and a world full of people who think they know Frank Sinatra well enough to touch him. Tank watched Frank's reflection in the mirror, noting the way the man's hands paused over his collar. But tonight was different. Tonight was a reminder that there are some things even the best wall can't stop. Frank's eyes met Tank's in the mirror. The question you need to ask yourself is whether you want to keep being that wall, knowing what you know now about how easily it can come down. The words hit harder than Chan's impossibly precise strike had. Tank had built his identity around being immovable, unbreakable, the kind of security that let clients sleep peacefully because they knew Marcus Rodriguez was standing between them and whatever wanted to hurt them. His reputation had carried him from Navy Special Operations to corporate consulting to this, protecting one of the most famous men in the world, and it had taken 12 seconds to prove it was all an illusion. Tank stood, straightening to his full height more from habit than confidence. I'll see you Monday, Marcus. Frank's voice stopped him at the door. What happened tonight stays between us. All of it. Tank nodded, though something in Frank's tone suggested this wasn't just about discretion, it was about survival. The drive home to Henderson took 40 minutes through the neon-lit arteries of a city that never quite decided whether it was paradise or purgatory. Tank's Cadillac ate up the miles, while his mind replayed those 12 seconds over and over, analyzing every movement, every breath, every impossible moment when a slight man had made 2 decades of training irrelevant. The house sat quiet in the desert subdivision, its Spanish tile roof and carefully maintained landscaping representing everything Tank had built since leaving the service. Maria's Volvo in the driveway meant she'd made it home from her book club, probably fallen asleep reading in bed the way she had for the 18 years of their marriage. Elena's room would be dark, his daughter likely video chatting with friends about college plans that felt simultaneously too soon and not soon enough. Tank sat in his driveway for 10 minutes, engine ticking as it cooled, studying the house that held his entire world. Inside those walls lived the 2 people who made everything else, the danger, the uncertainty, the proximity to violence that came with protecting public figures, worthwhile. Maria, who taught 3rd grade and believed the best solution to any problem was a home-cooked meal and honest conversation. Elena, who had inherited her mother's optimism and her father's stubborn streak, who planned to study international relations because she wanted to make the world a better place. They lived in a universe where problems had solutions, where hard work and good intentions mattered, where the biggest mysteries involved lesson plans and college applications. They didn't live in a world where ancient secrets played out in backstage corridors, where impossible martial arts techniques could humble giants, where Frank Sinatra carried 40-year-old burdens that drew dangerous attention in the middle of comeback tours. Tank wanted to keep it that way. But as he finally killed the engine and walked toward his front door, key in hand, he couldn't shake the feeling that what happened tonight wasn't ending, it was beginning. And beginnings, in his experience, rarely asked permission before they changed everything. The key turned with its familiar click, but Tank hesitated before pushing open the door. From inside came the sound of muffled television, late-night talk show laughter that meant Maria had fallen asleep on the couch again, probably grading papers until her eyes gave out. It was such a normal sound, so perfectly ordinary, that for a moment Tank considered turning around and driving back to the casino. Back to a world where impossible things happened, and men carried 40-year-old secrets like loaded weapons. Instead, he stepped inside his sanctuary. The house smelled like Maria's lavender candles and the remnants of whatever dinner he'd missed. Tank moved through the living room on silent feet, a habit from years of protecting people who needed their sleep. Maria lay curled on the sectional, red pen still in her hand, student essays scattered across her lap. At 45, she remained beautiful in the way that had first caught his attention at a Navy charity event. Not the polished beauty of the performers he guarded, but something genuine and unguarded that made him want to be better than he was. He gathered the papers carefully, noting essay titles about summer vacations and family traditions, problems that could be solved with proper grammar and complete sentences. Tank set them on the coffee table and covered Maria with the throw blanket from the chair, watching her settle deeper into sleep. She murmured something about parent conferences, lost in the dreams of someone whose biggest crisis involved 8-year-olds forgetting their lunch money. The refrigerator hummed as Tank opened it, looking for evidence of the life that continued whether he was home or not. Leftover enchiladas with a note, heat for 3 minutes, add cheese, love you. Elena's science project, something involving plant growth and different types of water, dominated one shelf. Maria's meal prep containers lined the door, organized by day because she believed planning prevented chaos. Tank stood in the blue glow of the refrigerator light, holding his wife's note, and felt the distance between his 2 worlds stretching like a canyon. In one world, Frank Sinatra carried secrets that made dangerous men send messages through Hong Kong actors who moved like physics was optional. In the other, his daughter worried about college roommate assignments, and his wife left love notes about reheating dinner. The phone rang. Tank closed the refrigerator and moved quickly to catch it before the second ring. The caller ID showed a number he didn't recognize, but the area code was local. Rodriguez. Is this Marcus Rodriguez? The voice was unfamiliar. Male, careful, with an accent Tank couldn't immediately place. Who's asking? My name is David Chen. I work with Jackie Chan's production company. We need to talk. Tank felt the canyon between his worlds collapse into nothing. About what? About what happened tonight. About why it happened. And about what's going to happen next if we don't meet. Through the kitchen window, Tank could see his neighbor's house, where the porch light illuminated a motorcycle that hadn't been there when he'd left for work that morning. A bike with Nevada plates, but something foreign about its lines, parked just close enough to have a clear view of Tank's front door. "Mr. Rodriguez? Are you there?" Tank moved to the living room window, peering through the blinds at the street he'd considered safe for 18 years. 2 houses down, a van sat at the curb, white, unremarkable, except for the barely visible glow of cigarette ember in the driver's seat. Tank had conducted enough surveillance to recognize when he was being watched. "How did you get this number?" "The same way we knew where Mr. Sinatra would be tonight. The same way we know your daughter leaves for USC in 3 weeks, and your wife drives the same route to Wilson Elementary every morning at 7:15. The threat was delivered without malice, stated like a weather report. Tank felt 20 years of protective instincts crystallize into cold fury, but underneath that ran something worse, the recognition that his family had wandered into the crosshairs of something he didn't understand. "What do you want?" "To explain what you witnessed tonight, to help you understand why protecting Mr. Sinatra just became much more complicated, and to give you a choice." Behind him, Maria stirred on the couch, and Tank lowered his voice to barely above a whisper. "What kind of choice?" "Tomorrow, 10 a.m., Red Rock Canyon. Take the scenic loop road, pull over at the 3rd overlook. Come alone and we'll tell you everything. What Jackie demonstrated tonight, why Frank has been waiting 40 years for this moment, and what you need to know to keep your family safe. And if I don't come, then you'll spend the rest of your life wondering why ancient societies care about an aging singer, and whether the next messenger will be as gentle as Jackie was." The line went dead. Tank stood in his dark kitchen, phone still pressed to his ear, watching his sleeping wife and understanding that the life he'd built was now balanced on the edge of someone else's war. Tank hung up the phone with hands that wanted to shake but wouldn't let themselves. 23 years since his last combat deployment, but muscle memory kicked in anyway. Sweep the house, check the exits, catalog the weapons. In the space of 30 seconds, his mind transformed the suburban sanctuary into a tactical environment. Kitchen knives in the butcher block, Elena's softball bat by the garage door, the Glock 19 locked in the bedroom safe upstairs. But tactics required an enemy you could see, and Tank was starting to understand that whatever had followed him home operated by different rules. He moved through the house like smoke, checking windows, testing locks that had never seemed inadequate before tonight. The van was still there, cigarette glow now extinguished, but the silhouette of someone waiting patiently behind the wheel. The motorcycle hadn't moved. Tank counted at least 3 positions where surveillance could monitor his family's movements without being obvious about it. Professional work, the kind that came with resources and planning, the kind that knew Elena's college schedule and Maria's morning routine. In the upstairs hallway, Tank paused outside his daughter's door. Light leaked from underneath, Elena burning midnight oil over something, probably her orientation packets or scholarship paperwork. Through the thin wood came the muffled sound of her voice, animated conversation with someone via video chat. She was talking about roommate preferences and class schedules, excited about a future that started in 3 weeks, a future that now had watchers who knew exactly when she'd leave for USC. Tank's hand moved toward the doorknob, then stopped. What could he tell her? That her father's career had intersected with something dangerous and ancient? That the protection he'd provided others for 20 years might not extend to his own family? That she should be afraid of shadows and strangers because her dad had witnessed 12 seconds that changed everything? Elena laughed at something her friend said, the sound carrying through the door like proof of innocence. Tank pulled his hand back and kept walking. The master bedroom felt smaller than usual. Maria had left his reading glasses on the nightstand next to a book she'd been trying to get him to read for months, something about mindfulness and finding peace in ordinary moments. The irony wasn't lost on him as he opened the gun safe with fingers that remembered the combination even in the dark. The Glock felt solid and familiar, but Tank knew better than to find comfort in weapons when he didn't understand the rules of engagement. David Chen had delivered his threat like a man offering directions to the grocery store. Calm, matter-of-fact, confident in ways that suggested violence was just one option among many. Tank ejected the magazine, checked the chamber, reassembled everything with the automatic precision of someone who'd performed the ritual countless times. But as he held the weapon that had made him feel prepared for 20 years, He realized preparation meant nothing when the threat operated outside your understanding of what was possible. Jackie Chan had moved like water, like gravity was negotiable, like the laws Tank had built his career around were just suggestions. How do you protect against that? The bed creaked as Tank sat on the edge, gun in his lap, staring out the window at suburban streets that no longer felt suburban. Maria stirred beside him, shifting toward his warmth without waking. In sleep, she looked younger, untroubled by whatever dreams visited elementary school teachers. Her hand found his arm, fingers curling around his forearm with the unconscious trust of 18 years together. Tank studied her face in the dim light filtering through the curtains. Maria had married a Navy SEAL who'd promised her stability after years of deployments and uncertainty. She'd gotten a security consultant who worked regular hours and came home every night, who attended parent-teacher conferences and helped with algebra homework. She'd gotten suburban safety and predictable dangers, traffic jams and mortgage payments and college tuition. She hadn't signed up for ancient societies and impossible martial arts and 40-year-old secrets that drew watchers to their quiet street. But the phone call had made one thing clear. Maria was signed up anyway. Whether she knew it or not. Red Rock Canyon. 10 a.m. Come alone and learn everything, or spend the rest of his life wondering if the next messenger would be as gentle as Jackie Chan. Tank looked at the digital clock, 2:17 a.m. In less than 8 hours, he could have answers, could understand what had happened and why, could learn what Frank Sinatra had been carrying for 4 decades and how it connected to Elena's college departure date. Or he could call in sick, pack his family into the Volvo and drive until the watchers lost interest, abandon the life they'd built, the career that defined him, the illusion of safety that had been shattered by 12 seconds of impossible movement. Either way, the man who'd fallen asleep in his own bed this morning was gone. The question was who Tank Rodriguez would choose to become. Outside, the van waited patiently for his decision. Tank watched the clock's red numerals shift to 2:18 a.m., then 2:19. Each minute that passed felt like a small death. The death of ignorance, of safety, of the comfortable certainty that had defined his world until 12 seconds ago. The Glock grew warm in his hands, but he might as well have been holding a paperweight for all the protection it offered against what he'd witnessed. At 2:47, he made his choice. Tank returned the gun to the safe, the click of the lock sounding like a door closing forever. He dressed in the dark, jeans, boots, a flannel shirt that had seen better decades, the clothes of a man who planned to drive into the desert and confront the impossible. He left Maria a note on the kitchen counter, called out early. Back by noon. Love you. 3 sentences that contained more lies than he'd told her in 18 years of marriage. But the truth was too dangerous, too large for the neat handwriting on yellow notepad paper. The garage door opener stayed silent as Tank raised it manually, muscle memory from covert operations clicking into place. No sense announcing his departure to the watchers who'd turned his neighborhood into a surveillance grid. The Cadillac started with a whisper, and he backed out into streets that felt foreign despite 20 years of driving them. The motorcycle was gone. The van remained, but as Tank turned toward the highway, he caught movement in his rearview mirror. A second vehicle pulling away from the curb 3 houses down. They weren't trying to hide anymore. The message was clear. We know where you live, where you're going, and that you're choosing to walk into whatever comes next. Las Vegas at 3 a.m. belonged to a different species than the afternoon city where tourists fed slot machines and caught shows. This was the hour of shift changes and emergency calls, when the desert reclaimed the neon oasis and reminded everyone who really owned the darkness. Tank drove through empty intersections where traffic lights cycled through their colors for an audience of shadows and wind. Red Rock Canyon was 30 minutes west, past the suburbs and strip malls, where the desert opened up into country that had looked the same for 1,000 years. Tank had hiked there with Maria and Elena, family expeditions that ended with picnic lunches, and Elena collecting rocks she swore were different from all the others. Normal Saturday adventures in a life he'd thought was insulated from anything more dangerous than rattlesnakes and summer heat. Now he was driving toward those same red cliffs to meet people who casually mentioned his daughter's departure date and moved with physics that didn't exist. The highway stretched ahead like a question mark, and Tank realized he was crossing more than just desert. He was leaving behind every assumption he'd made about how the world worked. The man who'd started this shift protecting Frank Sinatra at the Sands was disappearing with each mile marker, replaced by someone who had to accept that ancient secrets played out in backstage corridors, and that impossible was just another word for things he didn't understand yet. At 4:15, Tank pulled over at a gas station that probably hadn't been updated since Carter was president. He bought coffee that tasted like it had been brewing since then, too, and stood outside his car watching the eastern sky lighten over mountains that held their secrets like closed fists. His phone buzzed. "Maria, up early even for you. Everything okay?" Tank stared at the text for a full minute before responding. "Just couldn't sleep. See you tonight. Love you too," came back immediately, followed by a heart emoji that Elena had taught her to use. Such a small thing, his wife awake at 4:15 a.m., thinking about him, sending digital hearts into the darkness. But it felt like a lifeline, a reminder of what waited for him if he survived whatever was coming. The coffee was terrible, but Tank drank it anyway, using the caffeine and the bitter taste to sharpen his focus. In 6 hours, he would learn what Jackie Chan had demonstrated beyond martial arts. He would understand what Frank Sinatra had been carrying for 40 years, and why ancient societies cared about aging singers. He would discover whether his family was truly in danger or just leverage in someone else's game. But first, he had to drive into country where cell towers were sparse and help was measured in hours, not minutes. Had to meet people who knew more about his life than he knew about theirs. Had to trust that the same instincts that had kept him alive through 2 decades of protecting others would work when he was the one walking into the unknown. Tank finished the coffee, crushed the cup, and got back in the Cadillac. The eastern sky was blushing pink now, desert sunrise painting the rocks in shades of fire and blood. Somewhere ahead, answers waited in red stone country. Behind him, the van maintained its patient distance, no longer bothering to hide. The rest was commitment and miles. The scenic loop road cut through Red Rock Canyon like a prayer carved in stone, 13 miles of asphalt threading between formations that had watched civilizations rise and fall. Tank reached the third overlook at 9:47 a.m., 13 minutes early for a meeting he still wasn't sure he'd survive. The parking area was empty except for a single Honda Accord that had seen better decades, its Nevada plates dusty enough to suggest it belonged here. Tank parked 20 feet away, positioning the Cadillac for a quick exit while maintaining clear sightlines to the approach road. Old habits from protection details, though he was beginning to understand that his old habits might be useless here. David Chen emerged from behind a boulder formation like he'd been part of the landscape. Mid-40s, medium height, wearing khakis and a polo shirt that made him look like a weekend hiker. Nothing threatening about him except the way he moved. Economical steps that suggested awareness of every angle, every shadow, every possible line of attack or escape. Tank recognized the walk of someone who'd been trained by people who took violence seriously. "Mr. Rodriguez." Chen's voice carried the same careful tone from the phone call. "Thank you for coming. Didn't have much choice, did I?" Tank stayed beside his car, keys in hand, positioning himself so he could reach the driver's door in 2 steps. "There's always a choice. That's what I'm here to explain." Chen gestured toward the overlook railing, where the canyon opened up into a vista that had been selling postcards for 50 years. "Walk with me." Tank followed but kept distance between them, noting how Chen's hands stayed visible, his posture relaxed but ready. Professional courtesy between predators who understood each other's capabilities. The view was spectacular. Red sandstone formations rising like ancient cathedrals, shadows painting the rock faces in shades of rust and gold. Tourist country that hid secrets older than the city sprawling in the distance. "What you witnessed last night," Chen began, "was a demonstration, not a fight, not even a real conflict. Jackie was showing you something specific." "Showing me what? That physics is optional?" Chen smiled, and Tank caught something in the expression that reminded him of Jackie Chan's calm during those impossible 12 seconds. "Physics isn't optional, but understanding is. Jackie practices an art that most people think died out centuries ago. Internal martial arts that work with energy flows instead of against them. Energy flows." Tank kept his skepticism sharp enough to cut. "You're talking about mystical kung fu nonsense. I'm talking about skills that have been documented and preserved by societies that predate Christianity." Chen leaned against the railing, studying Tank's face like he was reading test scores. The same societies that Frank Sinatra encountered in 1945. The number hit Tank like cold water. What happened in 1945? Frank was 29, just starting to understand his real power. Not just as a singer, but as someone who could move energy through crowds, create emotional states that bordered on mass hypnosis. The societies noticed. Some wanted to train him. Others wanted to eliminate him before he learned what he was capable of. Tank watched a red-tailed hawk circle the canyon walls, riding thermals that made flight look effortless. You're saying Sinatra has supernatural powers. I'm saying certain people are born with abilities that science hasn't caught up to yet. Frank is one of them, Jackie is another, and every few decades the societies test their champions to make sure the old agreements still hold. What agreements? Chen pointed toward Las Vegas, visible in the distance like a mirage made of glass and ambition. That city exists because powerful people made deals 40 years ago, agreements about territory, about which talents could operate in public and which had to remain hidden. Frank's comeback tour isn't just entertainment, it's a demonstration that he's still strong enough to honor his side of the bargain. Tank felt pieces clicking together like a puzzle he'd been solving without knowing it. The Backstage incident was a test of Frank's protection, of his current capabilities, of whether age had weakened him enough to void the old contracts. Chen turned to face Tank directly. You failed that test, Mr. Rodriguez. The words hung in the desert air like an accusation. Tank felt 20 years of professional pride crystallize into something harder. I did my job. Your job was to protect Frank Sinatra using conventional methods against conventional threats. But Jackie isn't conventional, and neither are the societies that sent him. Chen's voice remained calm, but Tank caught steel underneath. Frank survived because Jackie allowed it, because the test wasn't about defeating Frank. It was about measuring his defenses. Tank's hands wanted to form fists, but he kept them loose, ready. So what happens now? Now you get trained by people who understand what you're really protecting against. Or you resign and pray that your replacement is luckier than you were. Chen reached into his shirt pocket, moving slowly enough that Tank could stop him if necessary. He pulled out a business card that looked older than it should have. There's a third option. Tank took the card. No company name, just an address in Chinatown and a phone number. The paper felt strange, heavier than normal cardstock, with a texture that suggested it had been made by hand. What's the third option? You learn what Jackie knows, not the mystical aspects. You're too old and too set in your ways for that. But the tactical applications, the real-world skills that let someone redirect force instead of absorbing it. Chen's smile returned, sharper this time. You become the kind of protection that matters in Frank's world. Tank studied the card, feeling the weight of choices that would define whatever came next. And my family? Stay safe as long as you choose wisely. Chen pushed away from the railing, already dismissing Tank from his attention. The address on that card, tomorrow, 7 p.m., come alone, and come ready to learn that everything you thought you knew about protection was just the beginning. Chen walked away without looking back, disappearing behind the same boulder formation like he'd never been there at all. Tank stood at the overlook, holding a business card that felt like a door to rooms he'd never imagined, staring out at red rock country that suddenly seemed full of watchers. His phone buzzed. Maria again, dinner at 6. Elena wants to celebrate her scholarship. Tank looked at the card one more time, then slipped it into his wallet next to pictures of his family. Tomorrow night he would either learn how to protect them properly or discover that some threats were beyond any protection at all. The hawk circled higher, riding invisible currents toward the sun. Tank drove back through Vegas suburbs that looked different in daylight, like stage sets waiting for the real performance to begin. The business card in his wallet felt heavier than physics allowed, weighted with choices that would reshape everything he thought he understood about protection, about family, about the careful boundaries between normal and impossible. 17 hours until the meeting in Chinatown. 17 hours to prepare for whatever Chen's people would demand, or 17 hours to figure out how to disappear his family before the societies decided he knew too much. The Volvo was in the driveway when he pulled up, Maria home early from school. Tank sat in the Cadillac for a long moment, studying the house where Elena had taken her first steps, where Maria had nursed her through childhood fevers, where they'd built the kind of quiet happiness that people killed to protect. Red rock dust clung to his boots as he walked to the front door, carrying desert secrets into suburban safety. "Marcus, that you?" Maria's voice from the kitchen, warm with the casual affection of 18 years together. "Yeah, babe, just getting back." He found her at the table grading papers, reading glasses perched on her nose, surrounded by the controlled chaos of fourth-grade math tests. She looked up with the smile that had convinced him to leave the Navy. The one that promised home was worth more than adrenaline. "You look tired. Long morning?" Tank kissed the top of her head, breathing in the familiar scent of her shampoo. "Normal things. Anchoring things. Just couldn't sleep. Ended up driving around thinking. About Elena leaving?" Maria set down her red pen, studying his face with the attention that had made her a good teacher and a better wife. "You've been quiet since she got the scholarship news." "Something like that." Tank sat across from her, noting how the afternoon light through the kitchen window made everything look golden, peaceful, like a life worth protecting. "When did she say she's leaving again?" "August 15th. We've been over this a dozen times." Maria reached across the table, covering his hand with hers. "Marcus, what's really going on? You've been different since your shift at the Sands. Distracted." Tank looked at their joined hands, hers soft from grading papers and helping students, his scarred from 20 years of standing between threats and targets. "How do you tell the woman you love that ancient societies know your daughter's departure date? That physics-defying martial artists are testing your family's security? That the comfortable life you've built together is balanced on agreements made before she was born? Work stuff. Nothing you need to worry about." But Maria's teacher instincts were sharper than civilian. "Marcus Rodriguez, I've been married to you long enough to know when you're carrying something heavy. What aren't you telling me?" Before Tank could answer, Elena burst through the front door with the kinetic energy of 19 years old. "Dad, you're home. Perfect timing. We need to talk about my going-away party." She bounded into the kitchen like celebration was a natural state, dark hair pulled back in a ponytail, wearing the Stanford sweatshirt that had become her uniform since the acceptance letter arrived. Tank's daughter, brilliant and brave and completely unaware that people were watching her. "Going-away party?" Tank kept his voice casual, but his mind was calculating threat assessments, exit strategies, ways to keep her close without making her suspicious. "Nothing huge. Just a few friends, maybe a barbecue. Mom said she'd make that pasta salad I love." Elena grabbed an apple from the counter, speaking around bites. "Sarah's older sister said college orientation is crazy intense, so I want one last normal night before everything changes. August 15th. Less than a month away." Tank wondered if the timing was coincidence or if the societies had been planning this demonstration for years, waiting for Elena to reach adulthood for the perfect moment to apply pressure. "Sounds good, Mija. We'll make it special." Tank caught Maria's questioning look over Elena's head. 24 hours ago, he would have been planning college shopping trips and father-daughter dinners. Now he was wondering if Elena would be safer staying local, staying visible, staying where he could protect her. "Actually," Elena said, settling into the chair between them, "I wanted to ask about something weird. There was this guy at school today, just standing by the parking lot. Asian guy, maybe 40? He wasn't doing anything wrong, but Sarah noticed him there when she left first period, and he was still there when we came out for lunch." Tank's blood went cold. "Did he approach you? Say anything?" "No, nothing like that, just watching, you know? Probably nothing, but you always taught me to trust my instincts about stuff like that." Elena looked between her parents, catching the sudden tension. "Did I do something wrong?" "No, baby. You did exactly right." Tank forced himself to stay calm, but his mind was racing through protocols, contingencies, ways to keep Elena safe without revealing why she needed protection. "Just keep being aware, okay? If you see him again, call me immediately." Maria's grip tightened on his hand. "Marcus, you're scaring me." What's going on? Tank looked at his family, his wife sharp enough to sense danger, his daughter brave enough to report it, both trusting him to keep them safe. In 17 hours, he would walk into a Chinatown basement and learn skills that might actually matter. Or he would fail another test and discover that some threats were beyond any father's ability to stop. Just being careful, he said, making promises he wasn't sure he could keep. Everything's going to be fine. But Elena's eyes were too much like his own, and Tank saw the exact moment she stopped believing him. That night, Tank stood in his garage at 2:47 a.m., staring at the gun safe he hadn't opened in 3 years. The combination spun under his fingers with muscle memory. Elena's birthday, Maria's birthday, the date he'd left active duty. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth like relics from another life, lay the tools that had kept him alive through a dozen protection details. The Sig Sauer felt heavy in his hands, not just its weight, but the weight of what it represented. 20 years of believing that superior firepower and tactical positioning could solve any threat. Chen's words echoed in the darkness. Your job was to protect Frank Sinatra using conventional methods against conventional threats. Tank had watched Jackie Chan redirect 350 pounds of trained violence like it was physics homework, had seen 12 seconds that shattered every assumption about how force worked, how protection worked, how the world worked. What good was a gun against someone who could make Newton's laws optional? His phone buzzed. Text from an unknown number. 3247 Spring Mountain Road. Basement entrance. 7 p.m. Come unarmed. Tank stared at the address. Chinatown, just like Chen had promised. The message deleted itself as he watched, pixels dissolving like digital smoke. Either the societies had technology he didn't understand, or his phone was compromised. Both possibilities were equally unsettling. He rewrapped the SIG and locked the safe, combination spinning to random numbers. Whatever he was walking into tonight, conventional weapons would be worse than useless. They'd be insulting. The house was quiet around him as he moved through familiar rooms made strange by circumstance. Elena's door, decorated with Stanford pennants and childhood photos that seemed to mock the idea of normal futures. Maria's even breathing from their bedroom, trusting him to handle whatever darkness he carried. Tank had failed protection details before. In Beirut, a car bomb had taken out half a convoy despite his reconnaissance. In Panama, sniper fire had found gaps in coverage he'd sworn were airtight. But those had been failures of tactics, timing, intelligence. This was different. This was failing to understand that the rules themselves were wrong. He stood in Elena's doorway, watching her sleep with one hand curled under her cheek like she was still 5 years old. 19 years of protecting her from scraped knees and broken hearts, and now someone who could rewrite physics was taking attendance at her school. Someone was measuring her value as leverage against him. The worst part was the certainty growing in his chest like a tumor. This wasn't random. Elena's scholarship timing, the society's demonstration, even Tank's assignment to protect Sinatra. It all connected to something larger, older, more patient than human planning usually allowed. His daughter stirred in her sleep, and Tank stepped back before she could wake and see the fear he was carrying. Elena trusted him to be the father who fixed problems and kept promises, not the man who discovered that some problems couldn't be fixed with careful planning and controlled aggression. Tank returned to the garage and pulled out the punching bag he'd installed when Elena started dating. Heavy canvas filled with sand hung from a beam that had held 20 years of frustration and fury. His hands found familiar rhythm, jab, cross, hook, uppercut, combinations that had kept him sharp, kept him ready. But as he worked, Tank found himself thinking about Jackie's movements, the impossible fluidity, like water finding the path of least resistance through stone. How do you punch water? How do you protect against someone who could turn your own force into their weapon? Sweat stung his eyes as the bag absorbed punishment that should have been therapeutic. Instead, each impact felt hollow, inadequate. He was training for wars that were already over, preparing for threats that had evolved beyond his understanding. At 5 a.m., Tank showered and dressed for a normal Tuesday. Khakis and polo shirt, wallet and keys, the careful costume of suburban fatherhood. But underneath, adrenaline sang in his veins like electricity, the chemical signature of impending violence that no amount of domestic routine could disguise. Maria found him at the kitchen table, nursing coffee that had gone cold hours ago. You never came to bed. Couldn't sleep. Thought I'd get an early start on the day. She studied his face with the attention that had made 18 years together feel like partnership instead of performance. Marcus, I need you to tell me what's happening. Elena seeing strange men at school, you disappearing for mysterious meetings. This isn't like you. Tank looked at his wife. Brilliant, compassionate, tough enough to handle fourth graders and Navy wives with equal skill. She deserved truth. She deserved protection. She deserved a husband who hadn't stumbled into ancient wars fought in casino corridors. There are some things about my work I can't discuss, he said carefully, but I need you to trust me. Can you do that? Maria's silence stretched between them like a bridge neither wanted to cross. Finally, she reached across the table and touched his hand. Just promise me we're going to be okay. Tank met her eyes, making commitments he wasn't sure he could honor. Everything's going to be fine. But in 8 hours, he would walk into Chinatown and discover whether protection was possible in a world where the impossible had rules of its own. The basement door at 3247 Spring Mountain Road looked like every other service entrance in Chinatown, scarred metal, peeling paint, the kind of anonymity that came from decades of deliberate invisibility. Tank arrived at 6:55 p.m., spending 5 minutes in tactical assessment that now felt like children playing soldier. Motion sensors, sight lines, escape routes, all meaningless when your opponents could rewrite physics. He knocked once. The door opened immediately, revealing a woman in her 60s with silver hair and eyes that had seen too much. Mr. Rodriguez, you're punctual. Ma'am, Master Chen is waiting. Please follow me. The corridor beyond stretched longer than the building's footprint should have allowed, lit by bulbs that cast shadows in the wrong directions. Tank's sense of space, calibrated by 20 years of room clearing and tactical positioning, insisted this was impossible, but impossible seemed to be the theme lately. They descended stairs that spiraled deeper than any basement had a right to go. The woman moved with the fluid economy he'd seen in Jackie Chan, each step placed with precision that suggested perfect balance was a learned skill. Tank felt clumsy behind her, his boots heavy on steps that barely registered her passage. Your family is well? She asked without turning around. Ice formed in Tank's chest. They're fine. Good. Family is precious, irreplaceable. The words carried weight beyond conversation. Tank's hand moved instinctively toward where his cig would have been, finding only empty space and the bitter knowledge that weapons wouldn't matter here anyway. The staircase ended at a circular room carved from stone that looked older than Las Vegas, older than Nevada itself. Soft lighting revealed training mats arranged around a central space where Chen waited in loose black clothing. But Tank's attention fixed on the walls, covered with photographs spanning decades. Frank Sinatra at the Copa, Bruce Lee on a movie set, Elvis in his comeback leather, Dean Martin laughing at some long-forgotten joke. And in the backgrounds, always in the backgrounds, Asian men and women who could have been servants, or security, or something else entirely. Impressive collection, Tank said, voice steady despite the growing certainty that he'd walked into something beyond his comprehension. History, Chen replied. Proof that our societies have been protecting the agreements for 40 years. Frank's career, Elvis's comeback, Bruce's Hollywood success, all dependent on balance being maintained. Tank studied a photograph of Sammy Davis Jr. performing in 1962. What kind of balance? The kind that keeps ancient power from spilling into modern entertainment. That ensures certain capabilities remain hidden while allowing others to flourish. Chen gestured toward the training mats, but balance requires maintenance, and maintenance requires those capable of enforcing the agreements, like Jackie. Jackie was testing current security protocols, measuring whether Frank's protection had degraded beyond acceptable parameters. Chen's expression remained neutral, but Tank caught disappointment underneath. It had. Tank felt 20 years of professional pride crystallize into defensive anger. I did my job. Frank was never in real danger, because Jackie permitted his survival. The demonstration wasn't about defeating Frank. It was about proving his defenses were inadequate. Chen stepped onto the central mat. Your conventional training failed against unconventional threats. The societies require better. So train me. Tank followed him onto the mat, muscle memory from a dozen gyms and dojos, making the space feel familiar. Show me what Jackie knows. Chen smiled, and Tank realized he'd just made a terrible mistake. As you wish. The attack came without warning, without telegraphing, without any of the preparatory movement Tank had spent 20 years learning to recognize. One moment Chen was standing 3 feet away, the next Tank was flying backward through space that seemed to stretch like taffy. He hit the stone wall with an impact that should have shattered ribs, but somehow distributed across his entire body like he'd fallen into water. Tank rolled to his feet, training overriding confusion, left hook toward Chen's center mass, putting his full 350 pounds behind the punch. Chen wasn't there. Somehow, impossibly, he'd moved around Tank's fist like smoke, and now Tank's own momentum was carrying him forward into empty air, while Chen's palms struck pressure points that turned Tank's nervous system into rebellion. His legs forgot how to support him. Tank collapsed onto the mat, watching the ceiling spin while his body remembered how to breathe. Chen stood over him, not even winded. Your daughter leaves for Stanford in 3 weeks, Chen said conversationally. Brilliant girl, full scholarship. The societies have been watching her academic progress with great interest. Tank tried to speak and found his vocal cords weren't responding properly. Fear crystallized into something harder than anger, the cold certainty that he was completely outmatched, that everything he'd built his identity around was useless here. The agreements require enforcement, Mr. Rodriguez. Frank's protection failed. You failed. The societies require assurance that such failures won't be repeated. Chen knelt beside Tank's paralyzed form. Your family's safety depends on your willingness to learn better methods. Tank's phone buzzed in his pocket. Text message. Visible on the lock screen. A photograph of Elena leaving Stanford's admissions office, taken that afternoon from across the street. The timestamp was 3:47 p.m. While Tank had been preparing for this meeting, they'd been demonstrating their reach. Feeling returned to his limbs like pins and needles. Tank sat up slowly, understanding that everything had changed and there was no going back. What do you want from me? Chen's smile held no warmth at all. Everything.